Hello, my name is Matthew Pfeiffer. Thank you for joining Toxic to Triumph. I'm here with a very special guest. I'm here with Tina Swithin, and she is an author. She is a divorce coach. She's out of California, and she is also a family court advocate. You can find her on One Mom's Battle. She is also on TikTok. Are you on Instagram too?
I am, yeah.
And you can, and she helps people with custody battles, with co-parenting, and we are right on the same team. So I'm excited to have her and looking forward to this conversation. And Tina, if you just want to take over, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. My name is Tina Swithin. I am out of California, but my story started here in California in 2009 when my therapist had dropped three little words on my lap that helped to explain my whole marriage, my whole life, and that was narcissistic personality disorder.
Mhm.
Um, Once you hear those words, you can't really go back. But the problem is, back then, there was really nothing out there on the topic. There were no resources. I came across one article written by Dr. Carol McBride, and it was such a huge light bulb moment for me. And as confusing and as toxic as it was being married to a narcissist, I didn't realize that it can get worse. And that is when you start a divorce
Mhm.
or a child custody battle. And so I call it a category 5 divorce hurricane. I'm someone who avoids conflict at all costs. And I have a really difficult time with conflict. And so being thrust into this family court system turned my whole world upside down. And yeah.
Would you say that that is people's biggest mistake is when they are afraid of conflict by just giving the narcissist everything that they want? Or what would you say creates that category 5 storm that you're talking about in a custody battle? What does that look like?
So for me, I had been such a, walking on eggshells and appeasing him and giving in and gave up all of my own needs throughout the marriage. And so that became, I didn't even know what a boundary was during our marriage. And so when I educated myself on narcissistic abuse, putting up boundaries triggered him. He was so used to me just jumping through every hoop that he set out for me that when I started having a voice and becoming empowered through therapy, it really spun him. And so, for me, it became stalking, um, just really bizarre behavior. All kinds of things that I say the day I got served divorce paperwork, it was literally like I was assigned my own personal terrorist.
Mhm.
And that's truly how I ended up going from a gated community to my local women's shelter and afraid for my life. And, it just completely rocked me. Um, and it rocked him because he wasn't used to this empowered Tina. And I say, I walked around for my entire life whispering, and then it was almost like someone handed me a bullhorn, and he didn't like that. So, um, yeah.
And it's interesting that you say that once someone said those three words, narcissistic personality disorder, that the light bulb started going off. And I tell people that once the blinders come off, they don't go back on. Like you
Right.
can't, once you see it, you can't unsee it. I compare it to that drawing that all of us saw when we were young, that on one side, it's a very young, youthful woman. On the other side, it is an older woman. And, when you're looking at it from one angle, some people only see the young woman, some people only see the older woman. But then once you see the entire picture, you're like, oh, it's two people like in one picture. And you can't unsee it. You can see it 30 years later. You're like, oh, I remember seeing that in second grade or third grade.
Right.
And it's the same thing with NPD. What was that epiphany like? Did you feel like you were in denial? Did you feel like, because back then 2009, there wasn't TikTok, there wasn't this,
No,
this big movement with
no.
people with support groups and things. And so I can only imagine that probably felt you were already isolated with him. What
Yeah.
was it like when those blinders started coming off back then?
It was interesting because when my therapist first, shared that with me, it sounds, people who haven't lived it or who aren't, I used to call myself a fixer. When she told me he's a narcissist, I actually got excited. I thought, okay, now what do we do? Now, how do we fix him? How do we save my marriage? Because I was just so thankful. I equate it to, if you're struggling with health problems, and you finally get a diagnosis, you're like, fantastic, at least I know what I'm dealing with, now let's solve it. And I remember she just looked at me with this incredible compassion and said, you don't fix this.
Mm-hmm.
You either learn that this is your life or you pack your bags and you get the hell out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And when I left her office that day, I was actually really angry. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, how dare she? First of all, she's never met him. She doesn't know, that I can or can't fix him. She can't tell me that. And so I went home and I told my husband, I said, my therapist said you're this word, you're a narcissist. And he was so confused. And so we looked it up together
Mm-hmm.
and we Googled it. And he goes, that sounds like my dad. And I'm thinking, oh my God, you and your dad are the same person. So I'm like, at least, but still, I was so hopeful. And I wear rose colored glasses and the whole deal. And I was still going, okay, at least it's a foot in the door. At least I've started this conversation with him and he's admitted it's at least in the family.
Yeah.
And so I was still clinging to that hope. We ended up, he wanted a male psychologist to meet with both of us. And it had to be a man and it had to be a psychologist, couldn't be a therapist. And so we ended up going to marital therapy for 6 months. And at the end of the 6 months, the therapist said, I really think we need to do a psych eval. Like, I think there's something going on here. And that was the end of our marriage. It was a threat to him that someone saw through him. And then he accused me of manipulating the therapist to help him.
Right?
Right. So, that was the end of the marriage.
I'm kind of curious to know this. A lot of people who go to marriage therapists, the narcissist will coach them on what to say on the way there, and will complain on the way home about the things that they didn't say or the things that they did say if they brought up any issues. Did you experience that at all?
I didn't. So he lived a very, we were married, but I always say I've never felt so alone in my life. We owned businesses together. So I never saw him between his triathlons and work. So we would just drive and meet each other at therapy. So I didn't personally experience that, but his entire family is very big on image. And, so to get him into a therapist's office, that alone was an incredible feat.
Yeah. Wow. And so how does this translate? So that was the end of the marriage. Now you guys are, you already mentioned that, what happened when you served the papers to him. Then what was it like when you transitioned from that to the divorce battle?
So I was about, there was a tremendous amount of financial abuse in our relationship. In fact, he had he had put us in debt over $1 million behind my back. So I left the marriage and ended up in the women's shelter with less than $200 to my name.
Wow.
Not a single savings account, retirement account. He had spent everything. And so I was truly at rock bottom. He was able to afford attorneys and I was not. So somebody who doesn't even like conflict, and I find myself in the family court system acting as my own attorney, looking like a deer in headlights because I never been through anything like this before. I was so beaten down by the process and the constant litigation. It was about 2 years into it. to where like I was literally sleeping with a hammer under my pillow, because I think mine is more actually in the sociopath
Mhm.
category. Um,
That's what I was hearing with out of this as well.
yeah.
Mhm.
And so for over a year, I slept with a hammer under my pillow, and I carried around an industrial sized can of mace around my house all day long, because I truly lived in fear of my life, for my life. And so it was about 2 years into the battle, and I just found that no one understood. Friends, family, even though they were very supportive, I would be telling them these stories, and they're looking at you sideways going, there has to be more to it. Like, no, and what is your part in it?
I was
And
just going
I'm
to say, what
thinking,
did you do? Yeah.
like, I
Mhm.
am, I always say I would be the best co-parent, again, with a
Mhm.
healthy person. I
Right.
would be the co-parent lotto,
Right.
because that's just my personality. Um, and so out of sheer desperation, because I truly didn't understand what was happening, I started a blog,
Mhm.
and that was One Mom's Battle.
Mhm.
And I intended for that to just be a way to purge what I was going through, to try to make sense of it. And so I didn't have to repeat the stories to friends and family.
Mhm.
And that caused a huge level of conflict, because he found out about the blog. And so, of course, now we're in court talking about my blog and what I'm doing. But then around that time, I was discovered by Christy Brinkley, who
Mhm.
was also going through a divorce with a narcissist back
Mhm.
then. And she and I connected, and she ended up putting my blog in the spotlight. And I started, overnight, it went from 30, 40 views a month to 40,000 overnight.
Wow.
And so, I went from just being this girl in a little local courthouse in California to international attention. And so kind of, this is how I got to be where I am today, was very much that
Mhm.
my battle, past that 2 year mark, we were in court. I mean, sometimes once a month, sometimes more than once a month, and it was all consuming. I was a full-time mom with two little kids who were in preschool at the time,
Wow.
acting as my own attorney, working full time. I was up at 3 a.m. trying to do court paperwork and prepare for hearings, and it's so much of it is a blur when
Mhm.
I look back.
Do you think that, I mean, obviously we can't go back now and, change the past or anything like that. Do you think that things would have been different had you been able to have an attorney?
I'm actually incredibly thankful, hindsight, that I
Mhm.
didn't
Okay.
have an attorney.
Mhm.
I truly believe, even though I was out of my element, that I was my children's best voice
Mhm.
and best advocate.
Mhm.
And I believe an attorney would have silenced me
Mhm.
a lot of the time, because they're very focused on the topics they want to control or where they think they can win.
Mhm.
The profession of attorneys, it's a lot of narcissists in there, a lot of
Mhm.
egos.
Mhm.
um, at the time, I would have done anything to have an
Mhm.
attorney.
Mhm.
Looking back, I'm so glad I didn't.
Mhm.
I believe that the success that I experienced in my case,
Mhm.
while it took a while, I can't claim any successes until year 6 of
Yeah.
my battle, when the court finally started getting what I was up against.
Mhm.
I don't think I would be where I am today, and that my kids would be safe if I had an attorney, because I've had attorneys look at my case and go, I've never seen anything like this. I've
Mhm.
never seen anyone with these types of orders.
Mhm.
So
And what did that, you obviously went for 6 years. How did you transition from to these actually becoming wins for you? What did that look like, the process in court?
you know, for me, I celebrated every little victory,
Mhm.
even if it was chipping away 3 hours from his parenting time on a weekend.
Mhm.
That was 3 hours of my daughters that I had to empower them, because
Mhm.
the reality is, when we have a parent who's a narcissist, we have to empower our
Hmm.
kids.
Yep.
And so, for me, it was the little wins that, and I'd have huge setbacks and then little wins. And it started with, everyone told me you'll never get supervised visits.
Hmm.
He will never, he doesn't meet the criteria for that.
Hmm.
And I refuse to listen to them. I'm like,
Hmm.
but he deserves them. So I'm going to
Yeah.
keep asking for them.
Hmm.
And I refused to listen to the naysayers.
Hmm.
And I just, kept my blinders on and kept going forward because I had to put my head on my pillow every night knowing that I was doing everything in my power to protect these little girls.
Hmm.
And so, for me, it was very much chipping away at the orders and the time he had until, it was professionally supervised. And then what we know about narcissists, their egos can't handle a court order like that. So
Hmm.
when I finally at year 6 secured professionally supervised visits permanently, I mean, we had been on a roller coaster with them. They'd give it to him and then let him have them again without a supervisor. And so it was just this constant roller coaster. When I finally secured a final custody order for supervised visits, he completely bailed. We didn't see him for 14 months.
Wow.
And that was a huge opportunity for my kids to start to heal.
Hmm.
We had peace during that time. The funny part, you'll appreciate this, when he decided to come back in after 14 months, he wanted to exercise his first supervised visit on my 40th birthday.
Of course. Yep.
You can't make this
No.
stuff up.
And
Um,
so for those of you who are listening and are unaware of narcissism, the reason why that's funny to me is I say all the time that they love ruining holidays, events, birthdays. And so for him to take advantage of that opportunity to try to ruin her birthday is very typical of someone with this personality type. Any Christmases, and you'll see this when you're co-parenting with them, they'll start arguments because narcissists love attention. And where a lot of people get confused is that they assume that narcissists only want positive attention. They want any attention. And sometimes the negative attention for them is better than the positive attention. They just
right,
want attention, whatever attention that they can get.
right.
Wow. So we're gonna have to redo your 40th birthday then.
Well, actually, by that point, I had pretty strong boundaries. And
Hmm.
I remember the supervisor called me, and it's so typical of so many players in the court system. And she said, well, no, we're doing it on September 24th. He has a court order that allows him that weekend. And I said, well, I understand we do, but we haven't seen him in over a year.
Hmm.
This is my 40th birthday.
Hmm.
He can have another weekend and
Hmm.
he can put this back in front of the court if he wants to explain to them why he's been gone for 14 months and now wants to invade my birthday.
Yeah.
So I held my boundary, and it was the only time in my entire battle that I violated a court order.
Hmm.
But I was like, no, he's not doing that,
Right. Uh-huh.
and I wanted time to get my kids in therapy to reintroduce him to
Yeah.
their lives
Hmm.
because he had become a stranger.
Hmm.
That's a big chunk of time
Right.
for a child. So, but it was actually, that was a lot of the finale, was him coming back in, it traumatizing my kids so badly that I ended up putting it back in front of the court and asking for a step up to
Hmm.
get, reintroduce him. And I remember the judge looked at me and said, why are we allowing this guy into their lives?
Right.
Somebody who can disappear for 14 months, this guy's a complete sociopath.
Hmm.
And my eyes, because I had planned my spiel, which was going to be the very kumbaya. I want him to be a part of their lives,
Right.
but I want to do it at their pace.
Hmm.
And that whole speech went out the window. I was
Hmm.
like, you're right, Your Honor. Why are we
Yeah. Hmm.
letting him back in?
Yep.
And then a year and a half ago, I actually ended up putting it back in front of the court, and we terminated his parental rights altogether.
Mhm.
So at this point, he has 0
Mhm.
rights to our kids.
Good. It's always nice to hear that when the good guys win, right? And one of the things that I love about your story, and I'm sure you didn't love it at the time, but it really illustrates that you really do have to fight, right? You really do have to fight. I tell people that you have to be the hero in your own story.
Right.
And the thing that I try to get through to people that I work with is that that there will come an end, but it's going to take longer than what you want.
Right.
Going into this, did you have like a certain expectation of how long you thought it would be versus what it really was? What was that like to you?
No, I had no idea what to expect. I just thought, oh, the divorce is final in 6 months. We start co-parenting, we move on. And what you just said, I want to highlight that, because one of the things I tell people is this is an ultra marathon. It's not
Mhm.
even a marathon. The good news is the narcissist, they only train for a 10K.
Mhm.
Some of them only train for a 5K.
Mhm.
Their tactics and antics are really not sustainable, and it's outpacing them.
Mhm.
It's having that, the tortoise and the hare mindset
Mhm.
of, I'm going to just keep plugging away at this. And, I had really dark days.
Mhm.
And the key for me, I allowed myself to have a pity party,
Mhm.
but I set an end time because I didn't have the luxury of staying in bed and, eating bonbons for a week. I
Right.
had two kids
Right.
depending
Two
on me,
young kids.
two young kids. And so it was very much, okay, I'm allowed, this sucks. I'm
Mhm.
allowed to feel all the feels and be angry and shake my fists at the sky, but then you
Mhm.
have to dust yourself off and try again.
Yeah.
And, I hear on this point, I hear so many people say, why am I even fighting? I'm doing all this documentation. No one's listening. And like, you can have that mentality. I mean, what works for you. For me, I can say, one of the things I pride myself on and I teach people is documentation.
Mhm.
And 99% of my documentation has never been seen by anyone in the
Mhm.
court system. But it was that 1% that protected my kids. And
Mhm.
it's why I have peace today. So I'd go back and do it all over again. And it was a full-time job. And
Mhm.
it does feel like it's in vain. But wasn't doing that on
No.
his end.
Mm-mm.
And if he did, it was the 10K mentality where
Mhm.
I'm in this for an ultra marathon. Let's
Mhm.
go.
Yeah.
Because these are my babies.
And I'll just from my 2 cents, I wouldn't even say it's a 10K marathon. It's a sprint for them. It's
Right. Yeah.
whatever works at the time. They're just throwing spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks.
Right.
If they find something that sticks, then they might go a little bit longer. But uh, whatever they can throw their gas on, whatever flame that they can get, right?
Yeah.
And because
No, and sometimes it's so bizarre. Like I remember my ex-husband, we were about 2 or 3 years into the battle and we're in court and he says, Your Honor, I don't even know that our marriage was valid because we were married in Hawaii. And I'm like, wait a minute, that
Mhm.
is one of the 50 states. If
Right.
Britney Spears' marriage in Las Vegas was valid, mine's valid.
Right.
but that just, and this is a guy who is very smart,
Mhm.
and makes good money, and you're like, did he really just say that?
Yeah.
But it's true. They will just throw out whatever that they think could work,
Right.
even if it's completely bizarre and not even reality based.
And it's part of the word salad. This
Yeah.
what literally whatever works. And I'm glad you brought up the point that he's very intelligent, because narcissists are very intelligent, which becomes a part of their
Right.
charisma. And because
Right.
they're so intelligent, people just assume that they must know what they're talking about. That
Right.
becomes a part of the danger. And so you mentioned dark days. Tell us, because I know a lot of people struggle with that, with
Right.
while they're in the middle of the battle, going through those dark days. And obviously when you're in it, it's very different when you're on the outside looking in. But what are some things that you did to take care of yourself to get through those dark days when you felt like, because you've mentioned that it's not like you're winning every single court system, every single
Right.
court date that you had. What
Right.
was it like? How did you keep yourself encouraged? How did you keep yourself going in those situations?
Therapy for me was critical. It was a non-negotiable.
Hmm.
I made that an absolute priority. Even if I could only go once a month, just to have that checkpoint.
Hmm.
Journaling, which actually turned into my blog, was probably the single most healing thing that I've done, because it was a way to process it. And in my first book that I wrote, one of the things I did was go all the way back to meeting him and examining the red flags. I call them red flag reflections through my book. And so for me, it was going backwards and honestly owning my part of it, because there were red flags and I overlooked those. I choose to see the best in people. Well, sometimes that is not a good decision.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was going back and going, okay, I own this. I made this choice to get into this relationship, even though it was with a complete scam artist. I had to own my part of it. And that was for me a personal healing journey. Because I'm not the victim type. I don't want, that's not the card I'm going to play. But journaling and, it just sounds so cliche, but gratitude, I just recently found the journal I started keeping back in 2009. And, every day I forced myself to write down 3 things I was grateful for. And sometimes it was just my next breath, if that was all I could find in that day. Right. But it was something it was an absolute for me. And it was so incredibly helpful.
Sounds like you were practicing something we both talk about, radical acceptance.
Absolutely. That is key. And I feel like that came naturally to me, that I'm very much, I can be pissed about something and work through it for a few days, but okay, we're here and now what? And I know with a lot of my clients, they struggle with that. And so it's something I constantly put back on their plate and help them to be aware of. It's like, I could sit here all day and talk about, the fact that family court, you're not going to get justice there. If you're looking for validation in the family court system, you're not managing your expectations appropriately. Right. And you're not practicing radical acceptance. No. You're here, we're in a broken system, and now what? Yep. That's kind of, so I feel like I can be kind of harsh dishing that out to people.
No, you have to. I am too. I'm very direct with people. That's the reason why, I don't know if you've done this, but this reason why I have, so people can work with me one-on-one, but I also have a group that's run by my assistant that when people are not ready for the very direct where I'm pushing people.
Okay.
And because some people, they're just not ready for that very direct in your face approach. Right. And, they're still kind of learning. They may have, just yesterday discovered that this person is a narcissist, and they're like, I know I need to leave, but I really don't know what's going on. And, so instead of throwing them to the sharks, we're like, okay, let's get you into the kiddie pool for a little bit. And then, and then we
soft fuzzies, exactly. Warm fuzzies. Right.
Exactly. Yep. So, and you mentioned, let's get into some of these custody battles that you're working with people. And you talk often about the system being broken. Right. Can you tell us a little bit more about the system being broken, and what does that mean, and how do you work with a broken system?
Oh boy, that is a big topic. A huge part of the issue is that judges and the people running our systems and our governments and our programs are so highly narcissistic themselves that they have a hard time, recognizing the problems in front of them. And then there's a huge victim blaming mentality in the court system. And I remember it was about 2 years into it when I was appealing to the court to help protect my kids. And the judge looked at me and he said, you chose to marry this guy. You chose to have not 1, but 2 children with him. You can't come into my courtroom and expect me to solve your problems.
Wow.
And I will tell you, that was such a punch in the gut. But I'm grateful for those words because it allowed me to practice radical acceptance, stop thinking of the court system as my savior. It's not their job to fix my problems. And that sounds harsh, but it is the reality of the system. And so then it was adjusting my sails and going, this is less about, you can't bring emotions into the courtroom. It's about strategy.
Bingo. I want to interject there real quick. One of the things I tell people I work with is that the court, and this is not me victim blaming, but they don't like victims in there is what it comes down to. You go in there, you stay matter of fact, and you tell the story. stick with the behaviors. But if you go in there and if you paint a picture of you being a victim, they do not like it
No,
whatsoever.
no.
They want to know the facts, the black and the white, the details of what happened and the behavior.
Right. And that is, even if it's a judge that's not narcissistic, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a lot of the mistakes that I see people making are going in there expecting, we know who the other party is.
Mm-hmm.
We know how bad the narcissist is. But what I tell people is, when I sit in the courtroom as an advocate, just, there to support someone, and I can put myself in the judge's shoes. And if I'm watching a case where I don't know either party, that person could be the best pathological liar.
Mm-hmm.
She's saying all of these horrible things about her husband, but there's no proof. And how do we know she's not just a really good liar? And so I have a different perspective as an observer now
Mm-hmm.
than I was as a litigant, because, I knew who he was. I knew how bad he was. And it's so easy to be driven by emotions in
Mm-hmm.
those moments. And, I say nature intended for me to protect my kids.
Mm-hmm.
You walk into the court system, they tie your hands behind your back.
Mm-hmm.
And now what?
Mm-hmm.
And so, really putting the emotion to the side, observing family court and watching attorneys and the direction they go, and figuring out that this is all strategy. And this
Mm-hmm.
is all, really, like you said, being precise in your
Mm-hmm.
delivery, not, cut out all the fluff. What is the problem? And then what are the examples to
Mm-hmm.
prove it?
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't, whether the judges are so narcissistic or they're just suffering from compassion fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
because they hear and see the worst side of humanity day in and day out, that wears on you.
Mm-hmm.
So when you come in with emotions, they immediately take a step back. And for so many who are divorcee narcissists, it's, your concerns are largely based on emotional abuse, psychological abuse. Those are really hard to prove, number one. But then number two, when the courts are seeing, children who have been beaten to the point they're in ICU, and then I come in and say that my ex-husband is neglectful and didn't give my daughter the right dose of Tylenol, they're like, but your kid's not in ICU. Like, what's your problem? Why are you here wasting our time?
Yeah.
So, you're on a scale of severe abuse.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't even hit on their radar.
One of the things that I learned, I was an advocate between a liaison, I'm sorry, between CPS and the New York family court system. One of the terminology that they used to use is it disagreeable or is it unacceptable? If someone comes in and if they're explaining, if they're talking about physical abuse, everyone agrees that that's unacceptable. Right. If you go in and you say, if you talk about passive aggressive behavior, that's disagreeable,
Right.
And so people I work with, I try to coach them through that. If it's disagreeable, that's not something we want to bring up. Right. The things that are completely unacceptable, completely uncalled for, that's the stuff we really want to focus on. A lot, I think that a lot, and you may and chime in on this as well. I'm curious to know your thoughts. I tell people you would much rather go in with 10 things that are really strong than to go in with 20 that 10 are strong and then another 10 that are kind of weak. You would much rather them focus on the 10 items that are really, really strong, really, really potent, factual based, we have evidence, than to try to overwhelm them with so much evidence, right? We'd much rather have a very strong 10 points.
Absolutely. And that's, when I look back at my battle as a whole, in the very beginning, before I understood the strategy aspect of court and before I understood the system as a whole, and who I was up against, one of my biggest regrets or, things I would have done differently is that I didn't choose my battles wisely. I didn't understand what the court cared about. And I overwhelmed them with the 20 things or the 30 things instead of the 10 powerful ones. And the courts appreciate that because, it's like a cattle call system. They're just turning people through all day long. And the details, a judge sees a stack of papers and they're rolling their eyes going, I've had my judge sit down on the bench with my stack of paper and go, I haven't had time to read this yet, give me a minute. And they're just giving it right in front of you. And that's what happens in chambers too. So the most powerful, direct examples you can give and being aware of what they care about is a much easier avenue than creating a long haul out of it.
And it's even worse now with COVID, with everyone being backed up with
Oh my
COVID.
God. Yeah.
With I know a lot of cases are very backed up. I know that skimming, I'm sure, is happening even more because they're so backed up. You have Zoom calls instead of people actually showing up.
Right.
And these cases, I mean, you have people that are going back to court after 5-10 years after already being divorced on top of current divorces.
Right.
And a lot of COVID in itself has already increased a lot of divorces because
Right.
people are losing their jobs and people want it out anyway. And so it is completely backed up. But what has been your experience with court and COVID and people that you've been working with?
It's an absolute nightmare. One of the things that stands out to me, like most judges, I know mine was trained in body language. So when you've got, like my ex-husband, he would sit up on the stand and you can tell he was nervous or, fidgeting or, the anger. When I would talk, you could, I knew my judge was paying attention to all of those things. With Zoom, you can mask so much of that. And so you don't get the full effect. And, I've seen in several cases where, the narcissist gets caught in a lie or the judge is pressing them on something and all of a sudden their internet connection goes off and they're not available now and they can't log back on. And so there's just, those little details. It's just not, it's a horrible situation.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
I remember when COVID first started, and I predicted right away when and a lot of schools were announcing we're going to do an extended spring break. The narcissists who had spring break that year decided now my spring break is extended until June. And so people were keeping little tiny kids from their primary parent. And, we talk about the gray areas and the loopholes, talk about a gray area that COVID created in so many different areas. It's just a recipe for disaster.
There was that, and my favorite was when, at least here well, I know other places did too, but when schools were going back, you would have, because in Texas, you had a choice. You had a choice on whether you wanted to keep your kids in or out. Well, another gray shaded area. Well, what the narcissists were doing in a lot of situations were, it didn't matter if your child was high risk. They would always go opposite of what the other parent wanted, and so that became another nightmare because if you were just absolutely, let's say your child was high risk, and like, why would you even consider sending them back? Right. And knowing that the narcissist always goes in the opposite direction of what you want. It doesn't matter if your kids are being exposed or putting them in harm's way, as long as it's causing chaos for you, they will do it. And so that was a major problem down this way. And I know in some other states too, but Texas sticks out to me because, I just know that they gave us options here, but it is never an easy task dealing with them. So. Well, great. Well, I would love your closing thoughts on anything you might have. I think you and I could probably talk all day, so we'll probably we'll have to do this again for sure at some point in time. But what are some? Give us maybe one or two closing thoughts for people who might be in a similar situation, going through a divorce. Just kind of going through that battle.
One of the things that I like to share with people, especially those who, when there's kids involved, you've already won. You're going to lose so many battles. You're going to get beat down by this system. I've yet to see a perfect, outcome in family court. But keeping in mind that you've won the war. You have the ability to have an authentic connection and bond with your children and love them unconditionally. And, the narcissist, even if they can fool the kids and play Disneyland parent for quite a while, it's not sustainable, and they lack that bond. And so, that is so important to keep in mind, that you've won no matter what happens.
Great. Tina Swithin, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being on with us. She is a divorce coach, family court advocate. You can find her on her website, One Mom's Battle. You can also email her, tina@onemomsbattle.com. And you can also find her on right there with me. I duet her videos quite often on TikTok as well. So Tina, thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care, Matt.
You too.